Hello and welcome to my presentation on art and literature of the 19th and early 20th century. I'd like to begin with realism. Early realism in literature and in art have a similar focus, which revolves more around the average life of average people than that of previous genres. The previous popular genre was Romanticism, which focused on heightened emotion, exceptional protagonists, and melodrama. The art and literary movements of realism step away from that. While the literary movement gained prominence around the American Civil War, the art movement was somewhat splintered. French realism gained prominence around the mid-19th century, around the same time as the American literary movement, but the American realist movement began around World War I. Realism is credited as the beginning of the modern era in art, characterized by its desire to depict a truth. Postmodern is a genre accredited for questioning what is art and making externally referential pieces. Both realism in art and literature share a focus, shining a spotlight on the common people. The painting above, Burial at Ornans, is one of the earliest influential realist pieces. It depicts a funeral, yet neglects to include figures like Christ or angels, which was typical in earlier eras. I chose this piece because it is considered one of the earliest pieces in the realist movement. The majority of people shown are peasants, and the clergy are not depicted in a dramatic fashion. It depicts an average funeral, yet romantic elements still cling to it. The graying sky and darkened figures create a sense of melancholic despair, an emotional depiction associated with Romanticism. The quote beneath it is from Life in the Iron Mills, and it is a depiction of Deborah, who is a working woman. Years of labor have whittled Deborah away. While she's a tragic and dramatic figure, she is not an exceptional protagonist. She is instead an average laborer. In this quote, the emotion and drama does shine through. Life in the Iron Mills is one of the earliest realist pieces, and thus still has some romantic influence. Her hopeless discomfort and veiled crime are examples of this influence. The Gleaners, the painting shown here, depict working women. Labor was of particular interest to the realism genre, as the general populace was mostly laborers. The women here are picking stray stalks of wheat after a harvest. This was painted in 1857, which was at the height of the realist art movement. It showcases the women, and behind them the men, doing the necessary but back-breaking work of harvesting food. Next to it is another quote from Life in the Iron Mills, this one focusing on Hugh Wolfe. He is the protagonist who works in the iron mills. Despite his artistic talent, he is instead forced to toil endlessly in the hot mine doing difficult work. The quote showcases this. The two pieces contrast in that Gleaners in Life in the Iron Mills showcase two different kinds of labor. In Gleaners, agriculture is depicted as a lovely and glamorous life, while Life in the Iron Mills depicts labor as difficult and arduous. These differences are emblematic in the difference between realism in art and realism in literature, where the former glorifies the worker and the latter does not. I included an image, the black and white one below, from the Gibson book, which is a keystone book to the New Women movement. This image depicts a woman golfing with the caption, "Advice to caddies. You will save time by keeping your eyes on the ball, not the player." The New Woman movement focused around women as active and independent people enjoying hobbies, and sports. The new woman has her own goals, dreams, and motivation. Next to it is the painting Harmony in Green and Rose, The Music Room, which is a painting by James Abbott McNeill Whistler. All three women are active, not just posing for a painting. The youngest girl is even shown reading a book. Whistler was a prominent artist of the realist genre, and while this painting was created 40 years ago, before the Gibson book was published, it still depicts women as active and independent, but shows hesitation, as we cannot clearly see what they are doing. At the time the Gibson book was published, Impressionism was the leading movement, and a lot of new women were depicted by Impressionist painters. The quote above the Gibson girl image is from Daisy Miller, a book about an American girl in Europe. Daisy is the poster child for the new woman. In this passage, she asserts her independence to her love interest, Winterbourne. The book follows Winterbourne, as he follows Daisy, catering to her misadventures, whims, and ultimately her untimely death. Daisy's independence led to her death, which can be interpreted as a critique of the new woman. While the central figures of these pieces are women, all three creators are men. The anxieties about the new woman are present and reflected in all of them. The quote on the left is from An Antebellum Sermon, a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar. Dunbar is a Black American realist poet. In this particular piece, he writes in a way that mimics the deep Southern accent that is attributed to slaves, former slaves, and other African Americans. This poem is from the perspective of a preacher or pastor retelling Moses' story, reframing it around slavery. Freedom was a major theme in his poetry, as was doublespeak. His words are coded, often having a hidden meaning that other black folk, well, not white folk, can decode. It is intended to pacify white readers, while other black readers can understand the meaning and messages. From a glance, a sermon about how Moses freed his people from slavery looks nothing more than a biblical story, but the intended audience understands that it is about escaping the American South and finding freedom. Next to it is a painting titled Uncle Tom and Little Ava by Robert Ducanison, depicting a black man sitting down and holding hands with the young white girl. Behind them, pastel sky and mellow trees create a soothing atmosphere. Uncle Tom refers to Uncle Tom's Cabin, an abolitionist book about a black slave. While this term has negative associations now, it was originally a bestseller and is widely regarded as a very influential abolitionist piece. Ducanison likely named the piece after Uncle Tom's Cabin to indicate that the black figure was non-threatening and a good influence on little Ava. The last quote is from The Conjure Woman, which is an anthology of stories written by Charles Chesnutt. The narrator is a white northerner named James, to whom Uncle Julius, a black man, tells stories. The quote above describes Uncle Julius's character. Julius tells stories in magic in a thick southern drawl. The stories are often used to influence James and his wife and serve Julius's higher agenda. His crafty language is another example of doublespeak. These depictions of race showcase realism through the black lens, adopting accents and using doublespeak to pacify white audiences. Both the literary and artistic movement of naturalism depended on telling the truth about a subject matter. Unlike realism, naturalism is characterized by the ability to trigger emotion. In literature, it is used to depict fundamental truth of its subjects. Oftentimes, these truths are hard and dramatic. In art, especially in painting, naturalism is used to show truth without regard for beauty and political agenda. Yet it differs from Romanticism in that naturalism ponders the deeper meanings and implications behind every action. In similar ways to literature, naturalism in painting also lends itself to Romanticism. Sunrise in the Catskills, as seen here, is an early naturalistic piece. The lighting and gnarled branches of the tree create drama that are generally associated with romantic paintings. It is intentionally beautiful and emotional, and ponders the raw power and beauty of nature. Next to it is a quote from McTeague, a naturalist book by Frank Morris about a miner turned dentist and his wife Trina, who won the lottery. The story follows the dentist, McTeague, and the deterioration of his character through greed. Here, he torments his wife over money, which they have both become obsessed over. This quote is an excerpt from Stephen Crane's War is Kind, a poem in which the narrator makes sarcastic comments about the nature of war. His dramatic yet truthful depictions show battle as gruesome and awful, rather than as a quest for glory and victory. This particular quote both includes the title, which serves as the refrain for the poem, as well as a vivid depiction of the battlefield. Next to it is a photograph titled A Lone Grave on the Battlefield of Antietam by Alexander Gardner. This photograph was taken during the Civil War, which was the first photographed war. Unlike the previous genre of paintings, depictions of the Civil War were often brutal and showcased the horror of war. Previous romantic paintings often focused around valor, strength, and glory. Depictions of the Civil War were often brutal and sometimes included dead bodies, though oftentimes it would be staged actors. I did not want to include not safe for work imagery, but I still wanted to focus around the naturalistic photograph. One of the central themes in McTeague is that the lower classes are destined to remain lower class, even if they acquire wealth. The quote on the right describes Trina after she has won the lottery. Her lower class upbringing led her to save her lottery winnings. Trina's insistence on saving leads the couple to live in an uncomfortably modest apartment, which causes them to fight about money. The couple's fights over finances lead them to make bad decisions and become broke. Norris deposits that their downfall is destined to occur and insists that class mobility is impossible. Her very ethnic upbringing prevents her from ever growing. This contrasts with The House of Mirth, a novel following the downfall of wealthy socialite Lily Bart. The House of Mirth instead depicts classes tied to social standing and wealth. The painting on the left, titled Haymakers, focuses on lower-class laborers while they have completed the day's work. Depicting themes of class and mobility are difficult in the painting, while this particular piece does comment on the two workers by showing them idle. By showing one worker sleeping while the other dons a vapid stare, painter Jules Bastien Lepage showcases workers in an unfavorable light. The quote on the left is from McTeague and is about the tertiary characters Maria and Zerkow. Zerkow, who is a Polish Jew, is repeatedly shown obsessing over gold. Maria's depiction of golden dining ore excites him, and he is driven to hurt Maria in mad pursuit to acquire gold. The anti-Semitic stereotype about Zerkow is the primary motivation for his actions throughout Norris's novel, and this quote showcases his obsession. Counter to that, Jewish with Oranges visualizes the Jewish shopkeeper selling oranges in Warsaw. The painting borders on the realm of realism, naturalism, and impressionism. Her timid expression and colorful wares mark her as a diligent laborer. Reaching its full height during the naturalistic movement in literature, Impressionism was the revolutionary at the time of McTeague and Daisy Miller's publishing. The artistic movements of realism and naturalism reached full swing before the literary movements. While Impressionism is not a literary genre, I still decided to include paintings because I wanted to highlight how the different forms of art move and influence each other. Like realism, Impressionism is a major change in artistic movements. For one, Impressionists would paint focused on capturing a single moment in time. The artists would sit outdoors to paint instead of painting in their studios. This piece shown here is one of the earliest pieces in the Impressionist movement, Claude Monet's Sunrise. The bright colors, reflected light, and brushstrokes all became key characteristic to art critics. I included this because of its character, depicting truth as a single moment in time. These two pieces depict women in Impressionism. On the left, we have Woman Reading in the Garden by American painter Marie Cassatt. On the right is Two Young Girls at the Piano by Auguste Renoir. These two impressionistic paintings showcase the new woman, active and independent, at the height of her time. Thank you so much for paying attention to this, and may your future endeavors in art and literature go well.